Hello and welcome to our episode of FinTech Focus TV with me, Toby. Today there is some very exciting news to come with the recent announcement behind Interop.io, and we've got two of the brains behind the whole thing. Reena, lovely to have you on the show.
Thank you, Toby.
In person.
I know.
We've done it on Zoom before. I feel like I've known you for ages, and now actually this is, believe it or not, the first time actually in person. And just as you've been crowned FinTech Person of the Year.
Thank you.
Incredible achievement. You must have been so proud of that. I know I am.
I'm absolutely honoured, really I am. And, thank you to the community for voting for me. It's a big privilege.
It's awesome. Yeah. And thoroughly well deserved.
Very well deserved, yes.
Yeah. And Steve?
Hey, Toby.
As always, great to have you on.
Thank you. It was nice to be here.
I know you've been deeply involved in all of this as well,
yep.
and talking things through. So just before we get into what we're going to be talking about, which is the whole story of this, and then everything behind interoperability as a whole as well. Just give everyone a little bit of a brief insight. Reena, we'll kick off with you. Tell us who you are, other than FinTech Person. That you do.
I'm FinTech Person. No. Yeah, so I work for Interop.io, previously Glue42, and I head up the solutions team there.
Fantastic. Steve?
If you didn't know, Steve Grob, founder of Vision 57, which is a fintech consulting firm, of which Glue42 has been a long-standing client of mine for maybe 3 years now. In fact, we started work about the same time, I think.
Absolutely.
And that's where we've seen the whole thing go. So there's a lot to cover in this. We've seen a lot of press recently. There's a big announcement, I think, last week with regards to the whole thing. Tell us the tale of the tape, Steve. What's that?
So the story is actually fairly simple and straightforward. So we had Glue42 and Finsemble, who were the two leading interop providers in the space. And we both had outstanding years last year in terms of technology, innovation, and also in client revenues and growth. And so both firms were thinking about, okay, how do we accelerate what we're doing? And we'd always had a genuine respect for each other as people, and also crucially for each other's technology. And so rather than both separately go out and raise a bunch of money, it seemed simpler and easier just to merge the two things together. And that's basically what became or has become Interop.io. What does it mean? It means a couple of things. One, we're able to dedupe to product roadmaps where we both had going to be building the same things, and we've got double the size of the workforce to do it.
Yeah.
But I think the most interesting thing, Toby, has been the reaction of some of the clients we've talked to, because we were getting involved in bake-offs between Glue and Finsemble all through last year. And those were really close, and clients would say, you know what, we picked Finsemble, but we were really tempted with you, Glue42, or vice versa. So when we've gone and talked to them, they've said, this is just fantastic because we get the best of both worlds. The level of support from our clients has been fantastic.
It's a really interesting sort of piece, isn't it? Because as you say, that there's going to be people there who would have had a choice between the two and then had looked at both aspects and seen strength in both parts of it. How seamless has been the process of going out to customers and talking to them about this and saying now it's an easier sort of...
It's so easy, as Steve said. The response has been hugely positive, and it really is a merger of equals. And we were aligned in so many different ways in terms of our vision, our values, and the goal, and the fact that we want to be sort of the Interop powerhouse, if you like.
Yeah.
But yeah, hugely positive, and our technology stack has just taken a huge lift because, as Steve mentioned, Finsemble had things in their product that we don't have, and vice versa.
I mean,
being able to accelerate that.
A great example of that is Finsemble had this really cool smart desktop builder, so you could knock up a front end in super quick time. And Glue42 had a zero deployment capability. So now you can build stuff really quick and deploy it super fast too. And a lot of clients have got really excited about that because it means you can spin up new front ends which in a world of uncertainty with T+1 and everything else is going to become really, really important, I think.
Yeah, and it's the perfect storm of all of that, isn't it? I mean, if we look at the clues in the name, right, Interop, around it, this has been something, I think, since we actually had that very first sort of debate show that we did.
Yep.
Interop has been the sort of mot du jour that people have been talking about. There's so many opportunities about it. You mentioned there, this, with the dramatic efficiencies that it creates, etc. So, Reena, talk us through it. Tell us the story of the Interop movement.
How long have you got?
Well, I've got it. I know there's a book. So we'll go on to that in a minute.
Yeah, I mean, look, Interop really is at the forefront of everything now. But I've been working on it for many years. Back to my JP Morgan days, that was, 11 years ago. And to be honest, that was one of the earliest forms of interoperability, if not the first. And so I was one of the architects involved in the precursor to Glue, which is now interop.io. And back in those days, we had a different name for it, but version 0 of Glue, if you like. But the idea behind it back then was that we were trying to retire a well-known trading platform, a vendor trading platform. And two, we came up with a vision of breaking down monolithic applications and moving to a microservices architecture, probably one of the first of its kind. So I feel that in those days, Interop was more of a byproduct of breaking down the monoliths and moving to this micro-apps world. Mm-hmm. But weirdly enough, throughout all those years, the design thinking remained the same. So it was still very much, and even up until now, until recently, Interop was really all about design thinking at the application level, and we've still been building applications in silos. And now slowly we're opening up with APIs and, this openness, open source flexibility, etc. And I think it was last year, I got really frustrated because the way, even with standards like FDC3, we're still approaching stuff like that from an application design level. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to shift that thinking. So I came up with the idea and the concept of something called straight-through workflows. So it's a term that I invented. It's an idea and it's a vision to bring the community together to solve the challenge of desktop interoperability. And for me, it's like a momentous shift in design thinking. Because for years, and as I said, it was a byproduct of moving into the micro-apps world. Interop was all those years ago. But for me, it's we've been focusing on applications, but really we should be focusing on users and workflows. Because one application in isolation is not what an end user uses. If you think of a trading floor, they might have about 15 applications. In operations, maybe something similar. Wealth, the same. So straight-through workflows was invented for that reason, and I was inspired by what STP did for Six back in the day. So I'm using it to inspire the community to sort of come together and just change the entire focus. Think about workflows, not applications, and the idea behind it is blurring the boundaries of applications, because users shouldn't even be aware of the applications in front of them. All they care about is doing their day job.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Making it as easy as possible.
They care about data and workflows, and that's it.
Yeah, it's fascinating when you look at that, and I feel a little bit star-studded from all this when I hear that sort of story. But it's an amazing, obvious thing to look at. But actually, it's a problem that's been sort of sat there for ages. If we're looking to define that problem and take it a little bit further forward, Steve, how would you position
I think it is really interesting because for so long people have just accepted massive levels of inefficiency and thought there isn't another way.
Yeah.
And what's been interesting now is when you've been able to open people's eyes up to say, you don't actually have to be navigating between 12 different UIs with 12 different notification systems that behave in 12 different ways. You can have just one, and we're talking now about UX orchestration. So all of that can be done centrally. And you're just using the bits of the applications that you need in any particular part of your job to do that. And at one level, I think people are going to look back and say, how come people thought that the old way made any sense at all? I think there really were people saying, really? It used to work that way?
I think that I think when I look at almost all technology. You look at it and you think, right, how much is actually usable? Everyone's got different parts of it. Everyone has focuses on different elements of what they need to use.
Yeah.
And I think the obvious part for me about all of this is it just allows it to be tailored to the individual needs of people. I always look at it and just think about how we consume anything these days. And I always, people who watch the show will hear me bang about this all the time, is I think the mobile phones changed everything in terms of just us expecting things to be able to be there and seamlessly work for us. And actually, I think what's happening now in what's been a laggard industry in financial services to actually say, right, we can have the same sort of experience.
Yep.
It's all about that experience.
It's a great analogy as well.
Yeah, one of the clients we worked a lot with last year and this year, Numis, wanted to make sure that technology was actually at the forefront of their messaging in terms of how they went out to win business, but also about how they recruited staff, so that they could bring in the next generation of workers and traders that expect a very, very different experience from their technology than people who've perhaps been in the industry for 20 years.
That's a really important part of it, and obviously, a buzzword for me around the recruitment side of it there. But when people look at that and they think, right, how are we going to attract the best talent and make it easy? Technology for me should be an enabler for people to do their job as best they possibly can.
Yes.
And I think when you're looking at that, it's making efficiencies that people make it easier for people to be successful, and that's what it's about, right?
And it's funny that we talk about efficiencies. For me, again, interop and efficiencies was phase one, but the key point here and the phase that we're coming into now is about effectiveness.
Yeah.
So we're moving away from, it doesn't mean that, Interop brings ease and efficiency, but for me, it's about how do you make people better at their jobs.
Yeah.
So it's that effectiveness.
Which moves into productivity.
Exactly.
So I think, productivity
trading
is
performance,
not
if you're a front office user, the way, client experiences, if you're more client facing. Yeah. But it's that's the key to Interop.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned beforehand, you touched on FTC3 and we've spoken about, a ever-increasing set of challenges and opportunities within it. Tell me about FTC3 in this jigsaw.
Yeah, I mean, for those people that don't know FTC3, it's a standard that we are developing for messaging on the desktop. So the best way to describe it is fixed for the desktop. But it really is very much in its infancy at the moment. It's an important initiative. We are not just contributors, we are maintainers as well. But for the moment, it is, for me, everyone should have a baseline of FTC3, and it's almost an entry level into the world of Interop. Mm. At the moment, FTC3 is more about data exchange, but there's so much more to building a platform. So if you are trying to build a best-of-breed platform, you need to go beyond FTC3. So you need FTC3 as your baseline, but on top of that, and Steve mentioned it earlier, you need things like UI orchestration, aka Windows management, it's just a fancy name for Windows management, notifications, global searching, you name it. There's so many more layers on top of Interop, building out micro apps. All of that is, forms part of a good desktop integration platform.
So at the very start, something that can go even bigger, brighter, and more productive for everyone as well.
And FTC3 obviously at the moment is focused very much on web-to-web integration, but you can go beyond that. And everybody's on different journeys of digital transformation. Not everybody's going to move to web straight away. Mm. So you've got to account for any technology integrations and legacy to web.
I think that's such an important part of it, that people are at different stages of digital transformation. And I think there's as I mentioned it beforehand, that there is a laggard element to this industry where, because of complexities, because of compliance, because of risk, all of those sort of things, it's been much more conservative than other areas. And some people have adopted it early and moved quickly, and other people are at different parts of their journey. I think that's quite an exciting part of this as well, isn't it? That it can adopt to that individual, as opposed to saying, here's a blanket one side. We've spoken about it a lot before, about the old enterprise technology. It's, here it is, this is what you do, this is what you have to sign into. And I think this whole thing creates a platform now for people just to be able to perform better and more tailored and more bespoke to where they are on the journey.
Yeah, and it's funny that you should mention that, because we've been working on something called the desktop Interop maturity model. Yeah. And it's exactly to address that, because it is tailored to different needs of clients and vendors as well. And coming up with a framework that people can assess their level of maturity for Interop.
it started off just as a way for us to talk about our own roadmaps and everything else, and then we sort of extended it out to actually, because in any new thing that happens to an industry, it takes a while for everyone to get a common sort of lexicon and language for talking about things. So a lot of what we tried to do was to publish some guidelines. So here you are, industry. Here is a suggested hierarchy of how you can move through different stages of interop. A bit like a sort of Maslow's hierarchy of needs type idea.
Yeah.
And one that helps people understand where they are on their digital transformation journeys, but it also enables them to see just how far they can go, because I think a lot of people can sort of say, oh, I've got FDC3 connectivity. That's just so at the beginning of the jigsaw.
Yeah.
And in fact, I think there's a diagram that you wanted to go through quickly that we could maybe walk you through. They're just places where FDC3 is and with everything else.
Yep, let me walk you through it. Yeah, so we developed this maturity model, and we've come up with 6 different levels. The first one I think we've already spoken about, which is 0, where you don't have any interop, so that's the fragmented desktop. And slowly, as you move up the hierarchy or the pyramid, if you like, you become more and more integrated on the desktop. So we also talked about FDC3. So FDC3 would be the next level, level 1, which is that baseline of interoperability. And then as you get further up, you go beyond the desktop. So you go more into a collaborative desktop where you can actually leave the desktop and start collaborating and streamlining workflows between different teams, between different groups, and even between different firms. And actually, we've already done that with a particular client of ours. And the ultimate goal, and everybody's talking about it at the moment, is AI.
Yeah.
So the ultimate goal is moving to that predictive desktop, where it really is not just data-driven, event-driven, but it's actually, not just smart, but I would say intelligent.
Yeah, it's a very interesting piece for me, this because I've had a number of conversations recently, as you'd imagine, around AI and its position within the marketplace. I've literally had a conversation this morning with a RegTech firm who were talking about its potential, and I think when they talked about the misunderstanding that we have around AI and generative AI and how it can all fit in there.
Yeah.
But actually, and if I speak to people who are on the other side of tech, the business side, they'll sit there and say, well, it's it's all very well if you're looking for approximate answers. Whereas actually, I think this is that sort of misses the point a little bit about what this can do, and the other the use cases of how you can take this further forward and have something that is just so intuitive and intelligent, as you say, to be able to take it further forward. So I love this, and I love the fact it's demystified, and I think that sort of ties into what you guys have been working on recently, where I know. I'm excited to scoop this one. that the ebook's coming out soon, where you go into this and you're taking through the whole journey of it. So tell us a little bit about why this came up.
Like all these things, it was a discussion that sort of developed into an idea. Again, initially just to help us in our own conversations about what we were trying to do and product roadmaps. One of the things we found is that people in the interop industry would be using either the same words to mean different things or vice versa. So it could get quite confusing quite quickly. And so what we wanted to do was, one, establish something that would take the friction out of understanding and give people, for better or worse, a way of measuring where they were on some sort of scale and use that as part of their overall digitalization journeys, because the two are really, really tightly intertwined. And what it's doing is it's showing you a pathway so that you can see how the human dimension of digitalization, which is the bit that always gets missed out, really starts to come to the fore, because it's about actually making us as human beings better at our jobs. And we also wanted to share, a few war stories too about, how to get it wrong, quite frankly, because we've seen some firms, not get the best outcomes they could have done. I mean, you've got maybe a couple of examples of sort of mistakes to avoid, if you like.
Yeah.
Give us your top 5.
Again. So I would say the first one is what I call old school design thinking, and we've already touched on that. So we're moving away from developing applications in isolation. So a lot of people are talking about Interop and they're going on that journey, but they're not changing their mindset when it comes to building a platform. So it's that openness, and it's about thinking about workflows and building workflows, not applications. And of course, I want everybody to embrace straight-through workflows. That's the first one. So just sticking with the old school design thinking. Number two, I would say, is doing or lack of doing proper due diligence for desktop interop providers. And this comes up many times with firms that we speak to. You know, they'll choose a desktop interop provider, go on their journey of platform building, and then have to halt the program because they haven't really assessed their needs. And it's not just technology needs, but it's business needs. So I would say do a proper evaluation of different desktop interop providers, but it also goes beyond the technology. So you've got to assess the technology, of course, but for me, it's about looking at it holistically and looking at your experience with that provider as well, because I always feel like it's a partnership. So when we partner with clients or vendors, it's about that solid commitment and experience beyond the sale.
Yeah.
So you've got to make sure that the tech is good, but actually the firm you're working with is actually going to give you the experience and the support that you need.
And the relationships, right, as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think also there's an issue around governance.
Yes.
Because one of the sort of ironies in all of this is by freeing data from applications and allowing users to build as many micro applications as they want, there's a risk it becomes a bit of a Pandora's box. And so you need to be able to have some kind of centralized set of rules that say this is how we in firm A want to build our micro application library. And so, you know, it as Reena says, it's as much about the non-technical aspects that lead to success as maybe just the pure technology.
I think that's so important in loads of different areas. I speak to a number of different companies and VCs, and saying just as much as the money you're able to raise and the background of that business, it's about who you're dealing with and what their interests are. I think that's exactly the same in this space, right? It's who are you going to be able? Who gets your product? Who's interested in where you're going? Who's not trying to shift a product that's then going to then depart it? And I think that's a big problem in software businesses everywhere. Where there can be over-promising and under-delivering around that as well. So, speaking of vendors, and this to me is where it gets really exciting around this as well, where we spoke about the enterprise model beforehand and saying, like, got an unpick, this is what you've got. To me, this is about the bright new future. And Interop absolutely gives us the opportunity there to bring in a suite of products that is fit for you, as far as I'm concerned, fit for your business, and has the best of everything, so you can cherry pick the perfect suite for you. We kind of know what it means for the industry now, which is pretty transformational. What does it mean for vendors?
I think you get you need to think of it in two ways. So first, you have the traditional workflow vendors, and a good example is what was formerly Itiviti, now B2CS, who've embraced Interop to not just connect the different parts of Itiviti together, but to connect the different parts of Itiviti into Broadridge, and then to offer a much more flexible glide path to their own customers when it comes to replacing one system for another.
Yeah.
And then the second category of vendor are the ones that are perhaps point solutions. And the problem they've always had, and we've talked about this, I can have a really innovative, cool little widget, but if it's not embedded in the workflow of my client, I'll never sell it. Yeah. And it's no good if I have to look at it over here. So what Interop does is it enables you to create, it sort of changes the whole build v buy debate into something much more nuanced, and enables people to put together genuine best-of-breed platforms. I think is really exciting. And again, there's another irony there, that in fact, that makes the traditional vendors, the incumbent vendors, actually more valuable and perhaps extend their shelf life.
It out, right? They can be. It's how can it be morphed in and used?
Augmented and enhanced. Exactly.
Again, it's that mindset. It's about thinking that, me as a vendor or me as a vendor product, I'm part of a greater ecosystem. Yeah. So I should be specialising in what I do best. Yeah. And then being able to partner or connect to the others through something like Interop.
Yeah.
So I like to say an application's value increases by the workflows of data in the platforms it can connect to. And Steve mentioned the point solutions. Well, it's funny, we were talking about fragmented desktops, but I feel we've got even more fragmented because there's a lot of fintechs coming out to fill gaps in, in particular business processes or data or something that's missing. Analytics, all these niche analytics firms, Sentinel, all of these firms. And as Steve said, they need to, it's great, product or fintech or application on its own is great, but it's so much more valuable in a workflow. So when I click on an order over here, I get the sentiment for a particular stock over here. So it benefits everyone. And I think the bigger vendors traditionally, not all of them, as Steve mentioned, Broadridge, are really going out there and being very open and very flexible. And we're pleased to be working with them. Some of the larger vendors that have remained closed probably see it as a threat to Interop. But actually, for me, it's a competitive advantage because they will become more secure and more valuable.
It's one-way traffic, Toby. It's not going to turn around and go back the other way. The direction of
absolutely see that. Makes no sense.
And the question is, the question is how quickly does it move? And again, that was one of the reasons behind trying to establish a common language for the industry to talk about this stuff, so that we can all innovate faster.
I think that point you made about workflow is so important, right? Because you have all the best tech in the world, unless it actually works in a way that you can make it work for you, and it's clear around where that goes. The amount of desktops that I see in any in my business where people have got these tools, but they it doesn't get adopted because of the implementation and the rollout and how it gets used and built into successful workflows. That's just as important as everything else, right? And that aftercare, I think, is incredibly important.
When you know a good application when you kind of get a sense that and you sort of say it just knows what I want to do next. So that's what you're kind of going for. Is somehow the spooky machine knows that I go from here and then typically I want to do this, and that's where a lot of that next best action MBA stuff starts to come in, which again is it's not, just to absolutely emphasize, it's not about replacing people. This is about making people better at their jobs.
It's empowering people.
And not only making them better at their jobs, actually enjoy their jobs a bit more.
Yeah, I mean that comes back into what we were talking about before, about retention, about profitability, about productivity, about individuals playing at the very best of their ability, and that sort of points towards the future. It's where I always like to end these conversations, which is getting a bit of a crystal ball out and looking into what we can expect and what this means for an Interop revolution at the moment, where there's a bright future in it. What does that look like, Reena, to you, and then we'll come to you, Steve.
I mean, as I mentioned earlier, for me, the buzzword is effectiveness in terms of making people more effective. So we've moved out of the ease and the efficiency, which of course Interop brings, but it's about making people more effective and bringing in things like AI to make things more predictive. So for me, that's part of the future. I want straight-through workflows to be part of the DNA of every vendor product. Think of STP. If I'm a client and I'm assessing vendors, I'm not going to be asking them if they support STP. I just assume that they do. That should be the same for the desktop. So I want STW to be part of the DNA for vendors. So that's really important. And
trademarked.
Yeah, exactly. Trademarked. And, I really do think that Interop is coming into its own. So it has gone from a nice to have to a must have.
Yeah.
And as Steve said, it's the road is only going in one direction, and I think we are just going to become more open and flexible with it. So
definitely, Steve, you'd agree with that? I know.
I think what I might add is what excites me about all of this is you look at the amount of data our industry is creating, and that's growing exponentially. Then you throw in the collapse of compute cost with cloud, and you've now got the ability to build any type of app you possibly might want and expect it to work together. I think there's 67 million different apps you can get for your Google or Apple iPhone, and all of the ones that should work together do.
Yeah.
And that's the sort of future that I think we're going to see in our industry, which is going to make it much more fit for purpose.
It just excites me about listening to it first and foremost, and it's an incredible opportunity out there. I want to talk about the book to close off. So First and foremost, when's it available? Where's it available? Where can people get around to it? And I'm also really pleased to say that whilst it's demystifying the industry, I'm also really, really pleased that interoperability has become Interop, because I remember our first time. Just how difficult it was to say it, right? It was like, that was my biggest concern the first time we ever talked about it, was just actually saying it as a word. So Interop is my first part when we're talking about removing friction. Make it easy words.
Yes.
And but talk to me about the book.
So we'll expect it to be available in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
I'm not exactly sure when this episode is going to go out, but we'll make sure that you guys get the ability to distribute it and let your viewers get a look at it.
Well, I've had a sneak glimpse beforehand, and it's fantastic. There's some great stuff in there. And in terms of Interop.io and finding out a little bit more, Reena, how do I get in touch with you?
You know where I am. Yeah, just come to our website. You can email me directly. LinkedIn.
We'll tag you all over LinkedIn and get everything moving. Well, listen, this has been one of my favourite ones of the day. It's been absolutely superb speaking to you. Thanks so much for coming in. Reena, lovely to meet in person.
Thank you, Toby.
And
Pleasure.
Steve.
Cheers, Toby. Thanks,
Thank
mate.
you all for watching. We will see you soon on another episode of FinTech Focus TV. Thanks a lot.